Brands are licking their chops at the prospect of machine-generated ads, and I'm not buying it. Hi there, this is a channel where I make fun of marketing and talk about marketing resistance. And as you might have guessed, today's topic is Coca-Cola's recent controversy surrounding their fully AI-generated holiday ads. So I think what we'll do here is I'll try to get you caught up on the whole situation overall, and after that we can ask some of the big questions about what the widespread use of generative AI in advertising might look like in the near future. So there are some pretty good write-ups about this whole situation online. I really liked this one from Forbes, and not just because I happen to agree with its point of view, but basically Coca-Cola, one of the most famous and successful corporations in all of world history, they worked with a number of different companies to produce a number of different holiday ads that were entirely AI generated. Now, the public response to this move was largely negative. I don't want to say like entirely negative, but in terms of visibility online, the negativity was pretty much all you saw.
It's less festive, more creepy holiday vibes.
And that backlash reintroduced a lot of arguments central to discussions surrounding generative AI, specifically in the area of visual art or filmmaking. And as someone who does not support generative AI artwork of any kind for a pretty wide variety of reasons, I think the negative response here was a win, at least of some kind. If it had a major impact on Coca-Cola's sales, it would have been a much bigger deal. I don't think that was the case. I really think this was limited to an optics thing. I also think that the backlash was positive here because it addressed both the use of the technology itself as well as the results. So on a technical level, those Coca-Cola ads were pretty poor overall. There are some notable mistakes, and they also have really rushed and awkward pacing. And at the level of impact or effect, I don't think that they're interesting at all. They don't feel creative. We're not seeing anything new in terms of the imagery. I've talked about holiday ads in the past. I guess it was about a year ago. You can take a look at that video if you like. So there won't be a deep dive this time around, but suffice to say, all of these ads really take from typical holiday advertising is some of the usual imagery, sort of the vibe, but nothing about the execution here works for me, and apparently it didn't work for a lot of people either. But if we step back from the situation a bit, I think we can see quite clearly that Coca-Cola probably wasn't doing any of this to create good ads. It is much more likely that they were doing this for cost reasons. This was likely much cheaper than hiring actual production teams to make these ads. And beyond that, I also think it's likely that they were doing it so they could be seen as embracing a category of technology that represents a great deal of value and hype, both in terms of like active investment as well as optics. For a couple of years now, you know this already, but tech brands have been extremely eager to publicly adopt and implement AI just in some form. It has basically become the defining trait of new hardware and software releases. And despite what the associated marketing for all that stuff tends to suggest, all of these AI features, and especially its promotion, it's not really for you, the customer. It is much more relevant to investor relations, I think. So for context, investors are who will turn tail and run if the companies that they're supporting for their own financial gain do not do and say exactly the things that they want them to do and say in that moment that they think will bring them more money as soon as possible. And of course, AI technology still has this sense of futurism about it, and so we've seen that means lots of investors get excited even by mentions of AI. They see it as a positive in many cases. So brands are rolling out AI stuff as fast as possible, more or less just so they can say that they are. The actual functionality of all that stuff is at least for the moment, fallen by the wayside. Now, for a company that's involved in tech, there are countless potential applications of AI that make sense. But for companies that aren't involved in tech, how do you show how do you convince everybody that you're really on board with AI when your product really doesn't have anything to do with it? So while I have no doubt that Coca-Cola is using some form of automation on the internal side for things like process optimization, manufacturing, etc., that stuff isn't big, and it's definitely not flashy. It's also not the kind of thing that you would really present to a public audience. But as I'm sure someone figured, oh well, our brand is famous for Christmas commercials and holiday commercials. Let's do something with that. So at least as far as I can see, there is a very pure corporate logic at the center of this whole fiasco, which makes it even funnier that it failed miserably. The ads are just plain bad, and they're bad in a very obvious way. I'm glad that people noticed, and I don't have too much else to say about the commercials themselves. But obviously there's a much bigger conversation to be had here. This whole situation did not break the seal on AI-generated advertising. It's been around for a while, but it did serve as a very public attempt to normalize AI-generated advertising. So, what are the implications of that normalization, and do we think that it's likely to continue? Sorry, my throat's really going, but I'm not sick. I don't know. Also, there's a real quick disclaimer I want to add before getting into the meat of this conversation, so go ahead and skip ahead if you want. I just think it adds some context as to why I'm talking about this stuff, and just my perspective, where this is all coming from. So first of all, I really don't want to talk about AI here on the channel. I really don't. It's a giant mess. I have lots of personal, private opinions about various AI applications, and I don't necessarily want to share those publicly. I'm not an expert in AI. I do a lot of research surrounding AI techniques and applications, and just as part of my job, but that's not my work. that's not my field. Yes, I am aware that in terms of like computation and scientific processes, even manufacturing processes, research in general, there are really incredible applications for AI technologies of some kind. However, when we swing over to the topic of generative AI and attempts to recreate or mimic human-derived artwork, I have nothing but negative things to say. And I won't be saying those things here. That's not the true purpose of the video, of course. But given this sudden and very, very public intersection of AI and marketing, I felt like it would almost be a mistake not to talk about this story in some way. So I'm just sharing some comments. They really are just comments, and they're comments from someone who has a kind of strange and tenuous relationship with marketing in general. Okay, so let's assume that the kind of AI-generated video we got for these Coca-Cola ads is meant to be replacing live-action ad production. You're replacing a production company and a team's worth of people who actually shoot the commercial, and you're also most likely replacing a lot of the post-production crew who would be responsible for coloring, editing, audio, mastering, etc. So right off the bat, we're talking about just removing the need for some pretty big teams worth of people. And of course, the elephant in the room when it comes to creative work and marketing is that this is where lots of creative professionals either end up in their careers, or it's something that they dip into every so often just to make some money. I have my own feelings about the debate surrounding the so-called art of advertising. I'd really like to make a video about it, in fact. But those feelings aside, I don't have issues with the professionals who are lending their talents to marketing teams in general. And in particular, I will always have sympathy for the people who are just getting paid per project, basically on a freelance basis. Getting to do your own creative work, like the exact kind of work that you want to do, full-time as a living, is always a rarity. There are some people lucky enough to live that life, but it's very, very few. It's very, very rare. And so as a result, it's common enough to, oh, I'm going to take a job on the side. I'll do some freelance work. I just need to help myself survive while I also work on something that I really care about. I've lived that life myself. There was a pretty good stretch of time where I was just taking any project that came up. Anybody who said yes to me offering my services, I went ahead and did that. And that included tons of work that I really didn't support, tons of work that I did not want to put my name on, which kind of turned out okay because most of these places just slapped a fake author name on my work anyway by default. And for someone in that kind of situation, the biggest benefit of marketing gigs, in my eyes, is that there's a lot of money there and it's fairly consistent. Clients are paying pretty big money for work. Agencies often have plenty of money to spend on specific projects. And at least up to this point, producing that work has required the skills of artists. So regardless of how I feel about the ads themselves, I have to accept that the automation of creative production means a lot less work and a lot less money for creative professionals, many of whom are not going to be getting wealthy doing this stuff. They're just getting by. So on the production side, widespread implementation of AI technologies, specifically generative AI, would mean far fewer human jobs in marketing overall. But if the Coke ads are anything to go by, the ads themselves would suffer. This is something that I just talked about in the ad preservation video a little while back. Something that I willingly accept and appreciate about contemporary advertising is that there are specific ads that really connect with people for any number of different reasons. And that kind of work, that potential for connection, is absolutely threatened by the advent of extremely common generative AI video. A very fitting example that was brought up in the wake of the Coca-Cola backlash was a very specific depiction of Santa Claus. This is one that originated as a Coke ad and subsequently became the Santa. This is probably what most of us think of when we imagine Santa in our heads, and this is where it came from. Regardless of its corporate associations, it's a really likable and charming illustration. So it's a great example of maybe unintentional artistry coming out of an advertisement that went far beyond its attempts to get people to buy stuff. And in terms of like creativity and originality, as AI developers will readily admit, all types of AI models and networks are inherently derivative. The quality of their output depends entirely on the quality of the input, and even with really high quality training data, the output is never going to be significantly different from the original stuff. In fact, like a really significant deviation would be considered a downside. That would be a problem. So while the reproduction, the mimicry of human thought is well within the bounds of AI technology, making something new out of nothing, in other words, creativity, is not. And in turn, that means widespread implementation of AI-generated advertising would lead to greatly reduced chances of seeing new and original ads that connect with people in the way that many decades worth of advertising already has. So prospectively, generative AI harms both production and that which is produced in marketing. The ads stand to be much worse, which has been borne out by early examples, including the Coke ads, and there are fewer humans involved in the making of those ads, which is a serious labor issue that also makes ads even more soulless than they might be right now. As for how likely it is that generative AI will become common in contemporary advertising, on an intuitive level, I could definitely believe that generative AI is something that most agencies would embrace willingly, both for the copywriting side of things and for video content. I think the only major source of hesitation would be the kind of blowback that these Coke ads triggered. And aside from public resistance to generative AI and its implications, the only other reason I don't think we'll be seeing really prominent examples of AI-generated ads from massive brands, in the immediate future anyway, is that the tech clearly just isn't there yet. But as the word yet implies, I think that's a temporary problem. If we do reach a point where AI-generated video is actually indistinguishable from real video, the hesitation would just dissolve. If it becomes something most people aren't going to notice, or if it becomes normalized quickly, I could easily see AI-generated spots just being the new norm. And depending on the associated costs, I could also see smaller brands in particular really latching onto this stuff. It could just be a really cold and straightforward business decision. Like, do we want to spend the money to contract a whole production company and production crews, post-production crews to put something together that we may or may not end up liking? Or do we just hand over a prompt to whichever AI outfit is offering the best rates and turnaround times? As cynical as this is going to sound, it feels silly to expect the marketing industry to prioritize anything other than profitability in its decision making. And I think that's the simple secret of this whole situation. If generative AI gets good enough, it will quickly become a viable alternative to hiring creative professionals. And like I said, that would mean much less creative work generally, and it would mean fewer ways for creative professionals to make a living and just to overreach for the heck of it when a society's creative and cultural base starts to dry up. It generally has very negative effects. So yes, this sounds like a mess because it is a mess. Obviously, I'm not invested in like the sanctity of the advertisement. I'm not rooting for the marketing industry to do well or to maintain some sense of integrity that doesn't really exist in the first place. But it would bother me if we just completely stopped getting interesting ads altogether because they're literally being churned out by machines. And more than that, a huge drop in creative marketing work would take away countless opportunities for creatives to fund their own, much better artistic projects. In the words of somebody else, thanks, I hate it. Thank you so much for joining me right up to the end. This was more of a timely topic, but most of my videos tend to be more evergreen, so take a look at the backlog for some more general topics in marketing and marketing resistance. Also, a quick channel announcement here right at the end. I'm hoping to try something out where I kind of have a live chat situation over on the community tab. Basically, I would like to set a specific time and date where I'm available to answer questions or just chat with people there. It's hard to find a good time and date for that exactly, and I would like it to be consistent, but who knows whether that'll work out. And yeah, I just think it would be a chance for us to talk about pretty much anything you like. And besides getting in touch with me, it could be nice for viewers to talk with each other. I think most of us are kind of like-minded on these topics. So I'm going to post ahead of time in a community post when I settle on a specific date. And yeah, if the whole thing's a horrible flop, we will not do it again. But I am hoping that this will be a pretty good way for you folks to get in touch with me directly. All right, thanks again. Until next time, take care.